since we filmed that video, they actually did release all the police footage, but that still hasn't been satisfactory to a lot of the people on the ground, and they're really still reeling from that tragedy.
Absolutely, and police brutality and accountability are major issues in this election for many African Americans. With us to talk more about it is co-founder of Black Lives Matter, Alicia Garza, and comedian and social worker, Malbroux. Thank you, ladies, for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, both of you, first Alicia, what is your Trump survival plan should he win?
Organizing. It's my Clinton survival plan also.
All right.
To be honest with you, what needs to happen in our communities is us continuing to come together, talk to each other about the problems that exist in our communities, and building a vision and solutions for how we solve those problems. That's not going to happen at the presidential level alone, or even sometimes a little bit. It's going to be the power that we build in our communities and the way that we network with each other across the country to actually leverage the kind of power that is going to change the conditions in our neighborhoods.
Just that.
Period.
Luna, what about you?
Oh man, well I'm gonna keep on telling jokes, I tell you that.
We need them.
Well, we need a lot of them. And I'm working on this project right now called Mapping Privilege, where I'm actually going out and talking to people about their understanding of privilege and identity. And I think if Trump wins, I mean, that makes the project even more needed, because there's going to be a lot of confusion and a lot of that hateful rhetoric that will be continuing that we already have. So it's just kind of like what Alicia said, continuing these conversations and building community.
So let's say Clinton wins, Alicia. This is a woman who supported the 1994 crime bill her husband signed, which resulted in so many mass incarceration today, basically. She also said the super predator, comment back then. Nonetheless, she has a lot of the support of African Americans and maybe some people in the Black Lives Matter movement. How do you reconcile the two, and what are your hopes for her?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. The president and the role of the president is really in contestation right now. And I think there's a way in which we place a lot of importance on that role, as opposed to the roles that senators play, the role that other Congress people play, and other decision makers in the issues that impact our lives.
Do either of you give her credit for what she's said thus far in her campaign? I mean, she's mentioned implicit bias. She has talked about institutional racism, little tinges of things that, very well is probably the Black Lives Matter influence, but maybe the Bernie Sanders influence too, like pushing her to be a little more progressive. Is that good enough?
I think it is very powerful to see someone who's a presidential nominee saying that there is implicit bias, that we all have implicit bias. I think that doesn't do enough, but I think even the fact that these are words that are now in the media that people are talking about, and people are really raising these questions, I think that's done a lot over the past year, and I hope to continue that. I think the question is, will this just be word service? Like, will we actually see actions behind that?
Alicia, I wanted to ask you about organizing specifically. Throughout this entire campaign, a lot of different Black Lives Matter local movements, different offshoots have pushed all candidates. But specifically, I think I'm remembering, rushing the stage at a Bernie Sanders campaign or rally and getting a sit-down meeting, I believe, with Hillary Clinton and with Sanders. Can you just talk about what was the strategy behind that, and did it sort of bear the fruit that you would have hoped?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the very beginning, what we wanted to do was influence what was being talked about by these presidential candidates, understanding that very few of them, right, were going to come close to what it is that we wanted. But quite frankly, before, they weren't talking about our issues at all. And so I think that what you see here is how direct action can actually play a role in reshaping the conversation. But to be
direct
honest,
action
like directly confronting people who have power over your life and who make decisions over the things that impact you. So when when people take the stage, when people take the mic and say, hey, instead of giving us your prepared campaign speeches, talk to us about Sandra Bland, who had been found hung in a jail cell just a few days before Bernie Sanders showed up at Netroots Nation in Arizona. So here we are, right? And we're shaping the conversation. But again, I think that what we have to figure out now is how is it that we move Clinton, if she wins, from an understanding of racism as people being mean to each other, right? Or interpersonal dynamics to the ways in which policies, procedures, and other systemic practices literally disenfranchise, marginalize, and kill Black people every single day. That's where we have to go now.
I want to ask you both a question. And so everybody's talking about this election, and they're like, oh my God, finally we can breathe a sigh of relief because it's presumably over today. I worry about tomorrow and the next days. And what this election has exposed for so many of us is how divided this country are, and how, racism is okay. It's open season on people of color. You saw the report I did in North Carolina where I talked to a number of African American folks, and it's happened around the country when I've been there reporting, where they say, I don't know how to protect my own life. When I'm driving and a cop pulls over, I don't know if I'll live. There's this legitimate fear. So maybe just on a personal level, what do you worry about looking forward, and are you optimistic at all?
So it's very interesting. I think I have this phrase of what's normalized gets internalized, right? And so I think so often we don't get a chance to talk about how seeing this happen again and again in our communities, seeing so many people being plucked out by police or vigilantes, how that affects you as a person. Yeah. I mean, just the other day, I was at Trader Joe's in Berkeley, and I turned in and I didn't put on my turning signal, and a cop pulled me over. And I was just like, excuse me, officer, can you please tell me why? Oh, you need to watch your tone. Are you kidding me? I mean, what better way to say it? How could I say it even nicer? And so if I don't feel safe at a Trader Joe's in Berkeley,
you have Brussels sprouts in your hand. Yeah. Excuse me.
Yeah, what do you want from me? You don't really feel safe anywhere. So it's just I really want us to have more conversation of what's it like to be living without a sense of safety and walking around with that. That really plays a toll on you.
Do you think the divisions are worse than ever now? Because I see it anytime, we do a story on Black Lives Matter, or I'm out live on a protest or something. This is a terrorist group, these are a bunch of thugs, these are whatever, and it's like, no, you got it so wrong, but I don't know.
I think that what has happened is that a sleeping giant called white nationalism has really come to the forefront, and this has been happening for a long time. I think the Black Lives Matter movement and other movements folks in Standing Rock, right, protesting against the poisoning of our water, are all kind of lifting up what is a really reactionary trend in our country that's been a trend for a while. Donald Trump then, of course, created more space for that, right? Actually gave it legitimacy and said, hey, come out into the light, right? You're safe here. And so when we think about what's going to happen next, I think we have to pay attention to the fact that those folks have been activated, right? But on the other hand, I do think it's important not to characterize our communities as divided, because communities of color, immigrant communities, Black communities, Indigenous communities, we're actually more united than ever. We're seeing more clearly the ways in which not only is there a real push to go backwards in terms of progress that has been made, but there's also a real push to continue to criminalize, marginalize, and disenfranchise our communities. And I think that's brought folks closer together. I mean, I'm a part of a project called We Won't Wait that had 2 million conversations with women and our families in 31 states. And everybody is talking about their vision for the future, which is not the vision that's being presented on CNN every day for the last 100 days, right?
What is
it? It's a vision of whole person politics, making sure that every piece of us can be seen in our political agenda, making sure that everybody gets to participate, making sure that families get reunited, making sure that we don't just close the wage gap between white women and white men, but close the wage gap between women of color and immigrant women and white men. That's an inspiring vision, and I'm seeing a lot of people being energized around that. So
I have a question around that, because I think that's really interesting, this idea of whole organizing, because you're seeing the conversation the past year around Black Lives Matter. The knee-jerk response was, oh, all lives matter, right? And don't forget about non-Black people, which obviously is not the point in terms of organizing to stop police brutality and have some sort of accountability. But what is the role of non-Black allies in the Black Lives Matter movement, and how can white people, without being, too fragile, and we've talked about this, play a role in seeking justice and getting accountability, police accountability?
Well, one thing I think everyone needs to look at their own implicit bias. I think often we talk about police accountability, but who's calling the police on people that they see down the street? Oh, this person looks dangerous. So I think if you want to be a white ally, I think the first place to start is looking within and doing a lot of personal work. And there are places and organizations where you can go to get that help and reach out, and don't just use marginalized people to kind of educate yourself. That's work that you can do on your own, and I think that's the first place to start.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think the other thing for folks who are not black but not white who want to participate in this movement is to fight anti-black racism, because it impacts all of us. The ways in which these policies are crafted on our backs impact all people of color, and it impacts white people too, to be quite frank. The other thing I think is really, really important, everybody today, hopefully, is voting. And quite frankly, as you said, it's not just about what's happening at the presidential level. People are making decisions about how resources are distributed in our communities, about whether or not police get held accountable for the crimes they commit in our communities, about whether or not we have access to affordable housing or clean drinking water, and even whether or not we have access to voting. So it's really important for folks who want to be a part of this movement to pay attention to the fact that you have some power in your hands to make decisions in your community that can actually improve the quality of life for Black lives and all lives.
So you're saying vote local.
Totally.
I think is what hashtag vote local, y'all.
Yeah.
And we were speaking to Alicia Garza and Luna Malbroux. I wanted to ask you two about, now that, as we talked about earlier, the sort of gloves have come off of vague discussions about, basically like the gloves have come off around white supremacy. I mean, you've got a candidate who's being endorsed by the KKK,
who sometimes retweets them,
who
intentionally
retweets
or
them,
unintentionally.
How do we put this back in the box? Like, how do we put this, like, can you put this jacket, I don't know what's the right metaphor, but, you were saying you see this ugly head of racism and white supremacy, like, flagrant, right? Open, like, yeah, there's a hierarchy of races. Like, okay, cool, great, wow, we're here, 2016. How do you reel that back in if and hopefully when, I can't say what I want to say, but we don't elect a white supremacist?
Well, I think the first thing, quite honestly, is that this upsurge, this uptick in white nationalism is speaking to a couple of things. It's speaking to fear of demographic change that's happening in this country, which automatically points towards an increased possibility for a decrease in political power. And they're also responding to, quite frankly, a reaction to not being able to access the quote-unquote American dream. Like, many people of color have not been able to access
So
that,
they're taking it out on the
So they're
immigrants and
taking
people.
it out on the folks who people like Donald Trump are pointing to, while people like Donald Trump are lining their pockets with money that should be in our pockets. So I think that the way that we deal with that, right, is we have to organize inside of these communities that are using this rhetoric because of the ways in which they're also getting screwed. And that's not necessarily the role of the Black Lives Matter movement, but there are organizations, like you said, that are standing up to make sure that white folks are organizing in their own interests, not against them.
Right.
Organizations like the Catalyst Project, showing up for racial justice.
Shout out to the Catalyst Project.
There's great work that's happening, and it just needs to be expanded.
I want to ask Luna, because you're mapping privilege.
Oh, yeah.
And when you say the words, I mean, I think white privilege, of course, there's class privilege, there's all kinds of privileges, but I think white privilege, and when you talk to people about that, even that phrase, white privilege, I mean, what kind of pushback are you getting? How is that being received?
Well, the interesting thing is I feel like people don't even have any operational understanding of what privilege means, right? So some people think of white privilege, people think of male privilege, but privilege is really contextual. And so kind of going back to your earlier question, I think what's happening is that people are dehumanizing other people. And I think when privilege comes up is a way of like humanizing someone based on how they are identified, right? Like you're seeing somebody and like, I can humanize you. But if you don't have this certain category, then you're an other, right? So I think what continues to come up is people othering other people. And what I'm trying to do is just start at the root, start with the I, right? How do you identify, right? Like, has there been a time when someone saw you a certain way that you don't identify? Really building that personal empathy to kind of allow people to be like, okay, well, if this is happening to me, maybe it's happening to those people that I'm othering, right? So that's kind of the process of how I'm doing it and working on it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. Alicia Garza and Luna Malbroux with the Mapping Privilege Project and with Black Lives Matter.
Thank you guys for being here.